homeless veteran on trial. Then the judge heard his name and stood up in silence. He walked into the courtroom, shackled and silent, old, fragile, head down, wearing a torn brown coat that looked like it had survived not just winters, but wars. His name was James Carter, 73 years old. No address, no family. Arrested for trespassing after sleeping behind a bakery on a freezing night. To most people in that courtroom, he was just another homeless man wasting everyone's time. A nuisance. A case to be processed and forgotten. But something unexpected happened. As the judge flipped through the case file, her fingers paused, her eyes froze, and then she whispered his name again. James Carter. A chill ran through her spine, because that wasn't just a name in a file. That name belonged to a ghost from her past, a man her brother used to write about in letters from the battlefield, a man he once said saved his life. That judge was Rebecca Hayes, and the man in handcuffs might have been the very reason her brother ever made it back home. Suddenly, what seemed like a routine case turned into something else entirely, and the courtroom, once cold and indifferent, would never be the same again. But no one else knew. Not yet. They didn't know who he was, what he had done, or why the judge's hands were now trembling beneath the bench. All they saw was a frail old man in chains. But they were about to learn the truth, a truth buried for over 2 decades, a truth about war, honor, sacrifice, and what happens when a nation forgets its heroes. Stay with me, because once you hear what happened next, you won't forget James Carter either. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button, not just for James Carter, but for every forgotten name the world left behind. They found him curled up behind a bakery, wedged between garbage bins and a wall that reeked of mold and old flour. It was 4 degrees below freezing, the kind of cold that burns your lungs from the inside out. He had no shoes, just socks that were soaked through and torn at the toes. His coat barely held together. And yet, he didn't complain. He just lay there, eyes half open, breathing slowly. They said he was trespassing, said he was disturbing the peace. The police wrote the report like it was routine. Male, unidentified, likely in his 70s, trespassed on private property, refused to leave. But the truth, he was barely conscious. He hadn't refused anything. He was just trying to survive the night. At the station, they asked him his name. It took him a full minute to answer. James, he said, barely above a whisper. James Carter. No ID, no emergency contact, no home. They ran his name through the system. Nothing flagged, no one came forward. So they processed him, printed the charges, and scheduled his court appearance like they always did. Another homeless man, another statistic. When he stood before the judge 2 days later, he looked even smaller than before, as if the warmth had been drained from him completely. The courtroom was cold, sterile, a place made for order, not mercy. No family, no lawyer, no one waiting in the back row hoping for justice. Just a silent old man in a frayed coat, and a name the world no longer remembered, or so it thought, because in that silence, something was about to shift. And the past? It never stays buried forever. The courtroom didn't care. Not about him, not about his story, not about the night he nearly froze to death behind a bakery no one remembered to lock. To the bailiff, he was just Case 472C. To the prosecutor, he was a line in the day's schedule. To the clerk, a fingerprint and a timestamp. No one asked where he came from. No one wondered why a man his age was sleeping in alleyways with frostbitten fingers and hollow eyes. Because this court had seen it all. Drunks, thieves, junkies, and the homeless. They came and went like ghosts. The defense attorney didn't show up, no one assigned to the case, budget cuts, they said, but no one really cared enough to fix it. The prosecutor. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and began reading the charges without even glancing at James. Defendant trespassed on private property at 2:41 a.m. on the 12th of January. Refused to vacate. No signs of forced entry. He read it like he was reciting grocery items. Flat, robotic, indifferent. James didn't react. He didn't look up. His hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from exhaustion. He wasn't even there, not really. His body sat in that chair, but his mind, drifting, somewhere far from fluorescent lights and legal jargon. Outside, the sun was trying to break through a slate-grey sky. Inside, everything remained colourless, clinical, cold. No one in that room saw a man. They saw a problem, a burden, a name to check off before lunch. But then, something changed. Judge Rebecca Hayes flipped a page in his file, then another. She read slowly, which was unusual. Her eyes stopped. Her expression froze. And for the first time that morning, someone in that courtroom actually looked at James Carter. She read his full name again, quietly, almost to herself, and in that moment, something broke inside her. She had seen that name before, but where? The answer would change everything. But then, the judge stopped reading, just for a second, just one name, and suddenly, everything in that room shifted. Why would a seasoned judge freeze at the sight of a homeless man's file? Why would her hand start shaking? If you're still here, good. Because what happens next isn't just surprising. It changes the meaning of this entire story. Don't blink. Judge Rebecca Hayes had seen thousands of names in her life. She had read through files thick with tragedy, violence, neglect. She had grown used to it, detached, efficient, sharp. But this name, this one stopped her cold. She didn't say anything, didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. But her hand, the one holding the pen, started to tremble. "James Carter?" She whispered it again. Not to the court, not even to herself. It was like the name had reached into her chest and pulled something loose. A memory, faint but alive. A name she hadn't heard in almost 20 years. And yet, it had never really gone away. There was a box under her bed. Letters, dozens of them, written by a soldier overseas. Her brother, Captain Daniel Hayes. And in those letters, again and again, was that name, Carter. The man who kept me alive when everything fell apart. The man who dragged me out when no one else could move. The man her brother never stopped talking about. But that man was a ghost, a story, a myth from a jungle she never saw. She had never met him, never even knew if he made it home. And now, he was sitting right there, in chains, wearing a coat full of holes, waiting for a sentence. Rebecca kept reading the file, trying to hide the shake in her hands, trying to stay the judge when every part of her was turning back into a sister. Was it really him? Could that broken man be the same one her brother called the bravest man I've ever known? She looked up, stared at his face. He didn't lift his head, didn't look at her, didn't recognize anything. But she saw it, even under the years of silence, beneath the weight of time and cold. She knew. She had no doubt. That man had once saved her brother's life. And now he was on trial, with no one left to speak for him. At home, under Judge Rebecca Hayes's bed, sat an old wooden box. It hadn't been opened in years. She knew what was inside. She didn't need to look. Letters, dozens of them, written by her brother, Daniel Hayes, Army captain, killed in action 19 years ago. She was still in law school when he was deployed. He used to send one letter a week, long, messy, handwritten pages full of stories, some funny, some terrifying, some unreadable through the stains of sweat and dust. But one name appeared more times than she could count: Carter. If it weren't for Carter, I wouldn't be writing this. He stayed calm when everyone else panicked. He carried 2 men on his back through live fire. In one letter, Daniel called him the kind of man the world never notices until it's too late. Back then, Rebecca assumed Carter was another soldier, someone honorable, brave, but distant, like everything else from that world. Now sitting in her courtroom, she was starting to think Carter never made it out. Not really, because there he was, skin like paper, eyes dimmed by time, back bent by a war no one remembered. Could it be the same man, the one her brother described as quiet, stubborn, fearless, the one who, according to Daniel, taught me more in 3 days of jungle than I learned in 3 years of training? She looked at him again. James Carter hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. He looked like someone who had stopped expecting kindness. She wanted to speak, to say thank you, to ask why are you here, but she couldn't. Not yet. She was still the judge, still bound by the rules. And besides, there was no proof, no confirmation, just a feeling in her chest that refused to let go. The man her brother died remembering might be sitting right in front of her, and no one else knew. Not yet. The prosecutor cleared his throat, dry, impatient. He was already halfway through the sentencing request. Community service, restricted movement, maybe a fine. James Carter hadn't moved, didn't speak, didn't object. It was like he'd already accepted whatever punishment the world had decided for him, like he'd been punished long before he ever entered that courtroom. But just as the gavel began to rise, the back doors swung open. Everyone turned, even James. A tall man in a charcoal suit walked in, not rushed, not uncertain. He moved like someone who didn't ask for permission. He walked straight to the center aisle and spoke, clearly, confidently. "Michael Grant, defense attorney. I'll be representing Mr. Carter." The prosecutor's jaw tightened. "You're not on the docket. This is voluntary representation." Michael didn't even blink. "Yes." The judge paused. Rebecca Hayes stared at him, just long enough to send a message, and then, simply, "Granted. You may proceed." Now the room felt different. This wasn't routine anymore. Michael turned to James, knelt slightly beside him, and whispered something we couldn't hear. James didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't even seem to register what was happening, but Michael stood up anyway, opened the file, and with a voice as sharp as glass began to dismantle the case. There was no criminal intent, no forced entry, no resistance. This was not trespassing, this was survival. The prosecutor scoffed. "He's done this before." Michael leaned in. "What repeats here isn't crime, it's desperation, it's abandonment." The room fell silent. For the first time since it began, people were actually listening. Something about the way Michael spoke. It wasn't just legal, it was personal, as if he already suspected there was more to this man than anyone else dared to ask, and he wasn't going to walk away without finding out what. Michael Grant wasn't the kind of man who acted on instinct. He believed in evidence, in facts, in paper trails. But there was something about James Carter, something that kept him up that night. After the hearing, he didn't go home. He went straight to his office, dropped the file on the desk, and opened his laptop. Search. James Carter. Dozens of results, none that matched. He tried military records, social security, veteran databases, nothing solid, just fragments, hints, loose ends. Where there should have been detailed reports, there were summaries. Where there should have been medical discharge forms, there were blank spaces. It was like someone had started to erase him, bit by bit, page by page. Michael dug deeper, called in favors, reached out to an old client, now a retired Army colonel. "James Carter." The man's voice dropped. "You mean Carter from Kunar province?" That name was legend. Used to say he pulled 3 men out of an ambush with one arm broken and the other holding a rifle. Michael leaned forward. "Do you know what happened to him?" A long pause. "Last I heard, he disappeared after discharge, off the grid. Nobody's seen him since." That was over 20 years ago. Michael started to suspect what the system had missed, or had tried to bury. James Carter wasn't a drifter, he wasn't a criminal. He had been a soldier, a decorated one, a ghost of a war no one wanted to talk about. And yet here he was, sleeping behind bakeries, wearing shoes with holes, forgotten by the same country he risked everything for. Michael didn't sleep that night. Instead, he printed out everything he could find. News clippings, partial reports, names of men who served in the same region. One name stood out, Captain Daniel Hayes, and there, in one declassified report, a single line. Sergeant Carter refused medical evacuation, remained behind to secure retreat of Alpha Unit. Action resulted in 0 additional casualties. Alpha Unit. That was Daniel Hayes's unit. Michael sat back in his chair, staring at that sentence. This wasn't just a case. This was a forgotten chapter of history, and a man the world left behind. He wasn't just a homeless man with a forgotten name. He was the reason an entire unit made it out alive. The reason a captain, Judge Hayes's own brother, ever made it home at all. And yet, while others got medals, promotions, memorials, James Carter disappeared. Why? What happened after the mission? Why was his name buried, his records erased, his body left to wander the streets alone? The truth was coming, and when the courtroom heard it, no one would stay seated. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was different. No longer a cold hallway of routine judgments, it had become something else. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the back wall. 2 military officers sat near the front, in uniform. And at the center of it all, James Carter, still quiet, still fragile, but not alone. Michael Grant stood beside him, a thick folder in hand, not just filled with paper, but with proof. The judge, Rebecca Hayes, entered in silence. She didn't need a gavel to command the room. Everyone was already listening. Michael spoke first, calm, precise. He didn't dramatize, he didn't plead, he just told the truth. Page by page, he laid out a timeline, a mission, a disappearance. He read reports once marked confidential, named names, cited medals that were never delivered, listed soldiers who survived because of one man, and showed how the system never called him back. The prosecutor tried to object, tried to reduce the narrative to paperwork. But then the first witness walked in, tall, grey-haired, chest full of ribbons, retired General Thomas Ackerman. He took the stand, cleared his throat, and looked straight at James. "I was a lieutenant the day Carter pulled me out of a ravine under fire. I had a bullet in my leg and was sure I'd die there. But he didn't leave me. He didn't leave any of us." Then another voice. A man with a limp. Sergeant Lewis. "Carter stayed behind when we were ordered to retreat. Bought us time. He was the reason I made it home to meet my daughter." And another. And another. Each testimony a thread, weaving a story of sacrifice the world never cared to remember. James listened in silence. Still he said nothing, but something in him shifted, his hands stopped shaking. The man who once slept in silence behind a bakery was now being spoken of like a hero, like a legend, and everyone in that courtroom, for the first time, believed it. Judge Hayes leaned forward. "What we have here is not just a case file, it's not just a man who broke the law. What we have is the portrait of a failure." The courtroom was silent. A man who served with honor was forgotten by the system, erased from records and left to freeze behind a bakery. Then she nodded. The double doors opened slowly. 2 military officers entered, one of them holding a small velvet box. Inside, a golden medal, polished, undeniable, the National Order of Valor. 2 decades late. James looked at it, his brow furrowed. He didn't understand at first. Then, realization. He whispered, "I don't deserve that." He died. The courtroom didn't breathe. Judge Hayes stood. For a moment she wasn't wearing a robe. She was just a sister. She stepped off the bench, walked to James. Her voice wasn't loud, but it shook the walls. "My brother came home because of you. He wrote about you in every letter. He said you were the bravest man he ever met. You gave him time. That's what you gave all of us. Time." James lowered his head, not in shame, in surrender. Tears welled up, silent, trembling, real. He reached for the medal, held it in both hands. As if it were too heavy to lift alone, he didn't pin it to his coat. He just held it to his chest and whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting." Then something no one expected. The prosecutor stood, straightened his jacket, and gave a salute. One by one, judges, officers, even the clerk, rose to their feet. No one told them to. No one had to. They stood for James Carter, the man they almost lost, the man the world tried to erase. Not anymore. For years, James Carter was forgotten. But you remembered. By watching this far, you honored a man the world tried to erase. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe heroes don't always wear medals, but they always deserve to be remembered, subscribe now, because we won't let their names disappear again. They gave him an apartment, not much. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a clean shower, a working heater. But for James Carter, it was everything. No more alleyways, no more cardboard beds. No more cold nights spent wondering if he'd wake up. He didn't decorate, he didn't invite cameras, he just lived, quietly. Each morning he made coffee, slowly, with care, boiled the water, watched the steam, poured it into a chipped white mug like it was a ritual. He didn't talk much, didn't watch TV. He preferred the sound of the street outside. Footsteps, car horns, dogs barking in the distance. It reminded him that he was still in the world, that he hadn't disappeared, not completely. Sometimes Michael Grant would visit. He never called ahead. He'd bring bread, fruit, news. James didn't say much, but when Michael sat at the table, James relaxed. "You okay, Mr. Carter?" "I'm learning." "Learning what?" "How to be at peace." At night, sleep still came in fragments. Sometimes the past clawed back. Sometimes he woke up sweating, gasping, fists clenched. But now he had a bed. He had warmth. He had a door that locked from the inside, and that made all the difference. One Friday, the doorbell rang. It was Judge Hayes. No robe, no file, just a folder in her hand. "Can I come in?" They sat at the kitchen table. She placed the folder down. "These are my brother's letters, some you haven't seen." James opened one, recognized the handwriting, read the words slowly, like they were being spoken from beyond the grave. "Carter saved my body. But more than that, he saved my soul." He looked up, eyes full, voice quiet. "I thought the world forgot." She nodded. "The world forgets, but the ones who were saved never do." That night, for the first time in years, James Carter slept through the night. No dreams, no war, just silence. But this time, the silence didn't hurt. If this story moved you, don't let it disappear. Subscribe, share. Remember,